and the ministry did a detailed investigation to find out that indeed I did nothing wrong. Sometimes you have a B2B discussion between 2 or 3 industry partners, but there's always a missing link. Easy answer. We need hydrogen. It's a growing market. We have a fuel cell engine for a car that is as good as an internal combustion engine. You just want to get involved. Because it is happening.
Yeah. A warm welcome, Klaus Bonhoff, to our podcast, The Hydrogen Leader.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to be here.
Yes. So, Klaus, in this podcast, we look at leadership topics, we look at your views on the hydrogen economy and just general growth topics. When I came to the hydrogen economy more or less 2010, something like that, started taking things more serious, some people talked about Mr. Hydrogen, Herr Wasserstoff, and that was you. So tell me, who is Klaus Bonhoff, and can you say something about being Mr. Hydrogen?
Those are really good questions. Who's Klaus Bonhoff? I am a family man, but since we're here in a more professional environment today, I'd rather focus on my professional side of things. I'm an engineer. I've studied mechanical engineering, specializing in energy technologies. I'm a European citizen. I truly believe that Europe has an added value, not only to us here in Europe, but globally. So the values that represents is close to my heart. I do like international relationships. I always think it is important to really look at various perspectives and have different views in mind when you talk about certain topic. I'm probably more of a moderating character, trying to leverage as much as possible resources to find win-win situations. And I like to do something that has impact. So throughout my career, I always liked to shape things, to be in a position to really move things forward.
So what about Mr. Wasserstoff?
Well, hydrogen really is like the common thread throughout my whole professional career. So I started in my PhD thesis to work on an autonomous solar system that had a seasonal storage path with hydrogen. I had various positions in research and industry, looking at stationary fuel cells, automotive activities, and hydrogen was always, one of these solutions to really accelerate the ramp up of renewables. And then I was looking at various end applications. As managing director of NOW, I was naturally a kind of a go-to person when you wanted to talk about hydrogen in Germany. And that was at a time where hydrogen wasn't mainstream. It was more in a niche. So that has changed today. But at the time, 10, 15 years ago, people would come to the National Organization for Hydrogen Fuel Cells to learn about hydrogen in Germany. And we went abroad. We had international corporations talking about hydrogen in Germany in various international formats. So I guess I just had a lot of contacts in that field, and I've seen quite a few projects and initiatives.
Yeah, I also saw, I mean, you said you went abroad. I think you also studied abroad for some time, as far as I understand.
I actually did, yes.
And so you speak other languages other than German? And
I speak English, German, and French.
And French.
So during my studies, I had the opportunity to spend a year at one of the Grandes Écoles in Paris. So that was a remarkable experience.
Okay, cool. Let's turn over to let's say the broader Klaus Bonhoff. And you said professional career. Okay, so please, Klaus, what would you say is your biggest professional achievement?
Probably being involved as I was in the founding of the NOW, National Organization for Hydrogen Fuel Cell Technologies. That was at a time where CO2 reduction, specifically in transport, became more and more important for the companies. How do we reach those
Just help our
targets?
listeners. What is the NOW again? Just say what it is.
It's a government organization,
Mm-hmm.
100% owned by the German government. It's a program management organization, and their role is to support and moderate large funding programs. The real key idea to start with was, if within a larger program you start to fund individual projects, you want to make sure that the results of those projects are not only valid for those who ran those projects, but that actually the results are being fed back into the industry or into the broader things, to really jointly look at the challenges that are not specifically, but for all of them. And that covers not only technical issues, that covers specifically the non-technical parts, as in communication, as in regulation codes and standards, as in market development. So that was the whole idea of NOW to start with.
Okay, so this organization was formed, and I think that's a great achievement. I've read some of your speeches from the past also, where essentially you said by 2025 we'll have an established, I think, 1,000 hydrogen refueling stations and visions like that. So we are in 2025 now. Unfortunately, we're not there. So what would you, in your analysis, say didn't go the way it should have?
The environment has changed. The assessment around 2010 was, we need hydrogen and fuel cell technologies in order to reduce CO2 in the transportation sector. And we still do. I'm very convinced of that. But at the time, lithium-ion technology was not at a point where one could have imagined that it actually has the power density and all the technical performance, lifetime performance, cost performance needed for an automotive application. So that's why the OEMs at the time were very committed to develop and bring to market hydrogen fuel cell vehicles. Then you need the infrastructure.
Yes.
So H2 Mobility was formed as an initiative of automotive, oil and gas industry to jointly develop an infrastructure.
Right.
And you were asking about achievements. I think chairing H2 Mobility for a while in its early phases, I think, was another major achievement, which I have good memories of, to be honest. So the game plan was, we need 100 stations throughout the country as an initial network in order to get the first vehicles accepted by the customer, because he would see somewhat, okay, I can refuel throughout the country. And then beyond those first 100 stations, a further ramp up would depend on more vehicles coming into the market. And then over time, lithium-ion technology developed further. The OEMs had, maybe not all of a sudden, but after new assessments, a lower cost option to achieve short-term CO2 reduction targets. And we're still talking about the time before 2020, where targets were not binding at the time. So that kind of led to the point that OEMs took other decisions in also economically tough times. So spending €1 only once is obvious, one of the principles. So that's why that ramp up of vehicles didn't come. That's why beyond the first 100 stations, we didn't see any further development of hydrogen stations. Nevertheless, they are still the not only technological base, but also experience base for where we are today, where unarguably, especially for heavy-duty transport, hydrogen fuel cell vehicles will be needed and will come into the market, and OEMs develop those technologies. So we have, even globally, I guess, one of the best experiences in running and operating a hydrogen fueling station, which helps us in moving forward.
Okay, interesting. I mean, on that note, I think as part of your role in the ministry, you were also responsible for revising the hydrogen strategy for Germany. And can you shed some light on that? What were your, what was different now, and how did you see things realign with this new strategy?
Well, the strategy that came out in 2020 was actually initiated by the Ministry of Transport and the Ministry for Economic Affairs and Energy at the time. And what has changed was the perspective on hydrogen. In 2008, when NOW was founded, the question was, where do we get hydrogen from for transportation, for stationary fuel cells? In 2020 and up till today, it is a mainstream understanding that hydrogen will be needed as a flexibility option in a renewable energy system. So all of a sudden, we're coming from the hydrogen side, saying, okay, we see that hydrogen being produced in order to kind of levelize fluctuations in a renewable grid. We can store renewable energies, and we can decarbonize industry sectors. And that was really the major driver for the strategy, which later on was revised in the question of what about the production of hydrogen? How much should we produce domestically in Germany? How much should we import? We are an energy importing country. So how is that all shaping up in the end? So that strategy was really instrumental to kind of set the pillars of then government action.
Okay. Well, that's cool. I mean, so I'm just thinking about the strategy and also the NOW, which you talked about, H2 mobility and so on. So I know you guys set it up at the time, but my understanding is that this NOW is meant to only be set up until 2026. So is there an end for this organization then?
Well, when NOW was founded, it was founded for a period of 10 years.
All right.
And the initial purpose was manage hydrogen programs. It developed further. The portfolio of NOW, although the name stayed NOW, the portfolio was expanded to include recharging infrastructure and to include any derivatives of hydrogen, as in renewable fuels. So, after the first 10 years kind of came to an end, it was obvious that it was a successful organization, and we need more time to actually develop this portfolio further. So it was extended for another 10 years, which runs until 2026. So now is the time for the new government to take that decision to make sure that the support from that organization will also be available beyond 2026.
My understanding is also that they have also done some strategy work to include even more other renewable fuels, not being hydrogen. So battery powered mobility seems to be an even stronger focus for them now than before.
Well, that was the latest development, that the outgoing government took a decision to focus more on battery electric vehicles and recharging infrastructure. With a new government coming into force anytime soon, and the coalition treaty that was published this week, it's a clear commitment for recharging infrastructure, but also for hydrogen infrastructure, and renewable fuels are mentioned in the context of sustainable aviation fuels. So yes, that broader portfolio of NOW, I'm very convinced of that, will be needed in the future.
So nice that you've come to this new government. And as we record this, indeed, Germany is putting a new government together. I saw the agreement as well. Found the word hydrogen 14 times in this agreement already. So what, if you can say, what is there advice that you would give to this new government being set up? I know it's a big question, but having been there, having been in the halls.
Well, first of all, the treaty clearly says that hydrogen has come out of the niche into mainstream energy politics. And it's mainly mentioned in the context of the energy policy. But then transportation needs energy. So if you look more specifically into where hydrogen will play a role in the transportation sector, it comes down to the hydrogen stations, especially for heavy-duty vehicles. And the question always is, with all these programs, how do you finance them? So I was quite happy to see in that coalition treaty that wherever fees come in from road transport related activities, as in the road levy, as in the CO2 payment at the pump, if you want to, that that money should be used within transportation. And then obviously the task is to develop sustainable mobility and politically make sure that the alternative fuel infrastructure regulation from European level is fulfilled. So there's a clear mandate from that to build out recharging infrastructure and hydrogen stations. And budgetary issues are always important, but there can be a meaningful kind of financial input from some of the fees that are related to road transport.
Yeah, you speak a bit about refueling infrastructure, road transportation. What about the other areas? Like infrastructure needed, or I don't know, steel manufacturing.
Well, one of the core tasks for the new government will be to fill the core network. The outgoing government has decided to build a core network for hydrogen in Germany. Rightly so. We need that. We need that infrastructure in order to be able to distribute the molecules across the country. But then obviously the question is, where does the hydrogen come from? Where is it produced? And who are the so-called off-takers? And there is throughout all the industry, chemical industry, steel industry, large off-takers that can decarbonize by using hydrogen. So this is very, very important to further reduce CO2 in an industrialized country like Germany.
Please do me a favor and subscribe to our channel. If you like the content, it helps a lot to grow the channel. Thank you very much.
So for someone who isn't following the politics day to day and doesn't know how the nitty-gritty of how these policies work, I am well aware of the pipeline network, which was which the previous government tried to establish. How does the new government now work with this? Do they have to do what was decided before, or can they just change it, or can they just say, now we're doing it different, we're building different pipelines? How does it work, just from a, let's say, government works perspective?
Well, the energy infrastructure as a whole in Germany is a highly regulated market. So you need to have permission in order to build the power grid, in order to build pipelines. So there is now the approval to build a hydrogen pipeline network in Germany. And then you always distinguish between the large pipes, which is like the central pipeline, the core network, and the distribution lines that later on, take care of the last mile.
So there has been approval for certain pipelines on certain maps to be built. This is the way.
The approval for those companies that build the pipelines to invest the money under the rules that apply.
Okay.
So it's still an investment decision by the industry.
Yeah.
But in the end, since it's a regulated business, it's pretty interesting infrastructure investment.
Okay. So can this change, next week?
That I don't think about next week. Everything can change, but there is throughout all the parties involved, political parties involved, a clear understanding that we need hydrogen, and industries asking for this kind of distribution network or pipeline network in Germany in order to not only make business longer term. So the question in financing is then always, I see the perspective of making money longer term, but why should I invest now? And this is where this mechanism that was developed for the core network is taking some of that risk.
Okay, cool. Okay, thank you. We've talked about the pipelines. We've talked about the government changing now, and also Germany's use of energy. Can you tell us, Germany? How do you see Germany's role in regards to hydrogen? From my humble perspective, there was some, I would say, pretty good investment in this, and Germany was pretty advanced in certain areas. How do you see the role now, and or also it developing over time?
Two things. One is that Germany is globally, even I would argue, one of the most attractive offtake market for hydrogen.
Offtake, okay.
So we will be using
will
hydrogen, and we will not all of it produced domestically. There is a huge potential for decentralized hydrogen production in Germany. But in the end, if you look at the sheer volumes that will be needed, we have to see imports as well. And import from a German perspective, can and should be foremost European import, but also international import. So we are an attractive offtake market. Just because the very specific situation that Germany has in terms of its energy supply, in terms of its networks and industries and so forth. Second thing is the technology and the know-how we have in Germany. There is a lot of good industry and advanced technologies within German industry around hydrogen and fuel cell technologies. So this, from a industry political standpoint, is an important point also. Yes, we are obviously an exporting country, which is going up and down the press these days with all its risk associated to it. But as an exporting country, our strength is built upon technological know-how. And this is something that we have developed in Germany over the last 10, 20 years quite substantially.
Wow. 2 strong points, I must really say. Thank you. So when you look a little bit globally, and obviously having been in the ministry, I think you guys just have to look over your shoulder, left and right. What are the others doing? What countries are getting it right? And can you give us a little bit of a global view on hydrogen strategies and what can we learn from others and who's getting it right?
Getting it right or wrong is a difficult assessment, to be honest, but we're definitely not alone in our endeavor to develop a hydrogen market. I'm fully convinced that we will see a global trading of green molecules. And wherever you have large potential for low-cost renewable energy, those countries will think about, well, how can we make that energy available for the rest of the world? Pretty much what we see on the fossil fuel side these days will happen eventually with green molecules as well. So there are countries that are ideally positioned to produce green molecules, and that starts with hydrogen in the end. So we're looking at the countries with high solar insolation in the Middle East or the MENA region. We're looking at Southern America. So there's large potential there. Australia, for that matter, is always a member there. Canada is very strong in that. So Canada has always been an energy exporting country, and they have understood that to do that in a sustainable way, hydrogen will have to play a major role. And then on the other side, you have those countries that need hydrogen. One of the most visible examples, I guess, is Japan. It's an island. It's 100% relying on importing energy. And, even 20, 25 years ago, they said, well, we'll have to import in forms of molecules, and hydrogen is an important energy carrier in that context. So they had a very consistent strategy and implementing of that strategy to import hydrogen. And then you have those countries that actually do both, produce large quantities of hydrogen and consume large quantities of hydrogen, and there China is on top of that list. It's a huge country. It's a fast development in a lot of areas. So whenever you talk about the sheer volume that China needs in terms of building out renewables, you find out that, yes, it's true. They're also building out still fossil fuels, but also looking at other forms of energy and power production. But hydrogen really is always part of the game for them. If you talk to them, they're not really thinking about exporting at this point in time because they just need so much for themselves.
Yes. Interesting. I need to ask you, so China, you see, is going to be playing a bigger role in the hydrogen. I understood from you now that they are a maker and consumer and are primarily interested in taking care of themselves at the moment. Cannot the rest of the world learn something from it? Wouldn't this lead to, obviously them having such a big market, wouldn't this lead to development of cheaper products, for example, there that other people could use?
Well, look at the most prominent example these days, which is BYD, as now being the largest battery electric vehicle manufacturer in the world. 10 years ago, China set a target of make in China. And the Chinese market, in the end, for those mass volumes that are needed, is not even large enough. So they need to export as well. But the first step is, look at their own country. And they have come to a point where technology-wise, customer orientation, they are hard to beat.
Yeah.
They are hard to beat. And if you look at the hydrogen market, even already today, we see performance-wise very good electrolyzer technology at 1/3 of the cost that we see here. So if there is an important learning for us in Germany and in Europe, it is to really look into the value chains and assess where in that value chain can we add value and kind of build our business around that. And this is what China has been doing over the last 10, 15 years very, very strongly.
So if I were a German manufacturing third generation inherited CEO, what advice would you give me now? So my family has been running manufacturing. We now want to go into renewables. We want to do maybe something with hydrogen. What advice, knowing what we just learned from China and so on, what advice would you give me?
Well, that's a difficult example because you're talking about an industry, an incumbent industry, that is still making money with what they do.
Yeah.
At the same time, everybody understands things will change.
Yeah.
10, 20 years down the road, with what I offer today, I may not even be in the market anymore.
Yeah.
So the question of the transformation ahead of us for each individual enterprise is an important one, but you have to be able to afford that transition and to pay for the development. Honestly, I think over the last decades, we've always seen changes.
Klaus, so very interesting analysis. Now, from that, I hear that there are two types of companies. So the ones that, let's say, get up and say, okay, I'm going to do something with hydrogen, and then they're basically trying to make their business in that field. And then there are the others who are making money with something else, and then can invest in hydrogen. And it seems to be that getting into scale is taking longer than expected. So, what's your take on this scenario? The only ones who are going to make it those ones who can make money with something else in the meantime, whilst we wait?
Well, apparently not. Look at what Tesla has been doing in the battery electric vehicle field. They started from scratch, and they are a dominant player in that field today. So you can start on a green field.
Okay.
But obviously, we have a very complex industrial and financial system, and we need to make sure that investments are also being used for powering the transition, I would argue.
Yeah.
So those industry that come from incumbent technologies need to find a way to kind of get their know-how into the hydrogen field as well. And you mentioned it. Yes, it does take longer than expected. And this is mainly from my assessment because the global financial system just isn't willing to take that risk, where at the same time, we're looking at AI, we're looking at medical technologies where investments show a lower risk. So we have to make sure, and this is where government support is so important, we have to make sure that also the investment community understands that we need hydrogen and that on the long term you can actually make money with hydrogen.
Yeah, okay. And government, will be needed to hold that up for a while. So, Klaus, I would say in 2010 or thereabouts, when I got more serious about hydrogen topics in business also, a lot of people had you as Mr. Wasserstoff. But the last 2 years, and now we're in 2025, some of us were concerned because there were some, information going around that there were allegations against your role in this industry, and as you said, you were an impactful person, are still. So let's unpack that a little bit, and maybe let's start by what was your role at the time these allegations came up?
Well, that's actually probably something a lot of people are not really aware of within the hydrogen sector. As Director General for policy issues, I was responsible in three fields. One was everything that is overarching across modes of transport within the Federal Ministry for Transport, as in research, logistics, financing.
So you were a Director General within the Ministry of Transport
Yes.
in Germany.
In-
Okay. So
yeah.
part of the government
Exactly.
writing policy that governs this nation.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. And that was the first field,
Yeah.
so the more general topics within the Federal Ministry of Transport. The second field was the European and international business of that ministry. So all of the regulations and directives that the Ministry of Transport is directly responsible for. I had that link to Brussels to kind of shape the processes and follow the processes around that. And the third field that I was responsible for was sustainable mobility. So obviously we need to reduce CO2 in transport, and there's large federal programs that target mainly three areas, which is battery electric vehicles, which is hydrogen fuel cell vehicles, and which is renewable fuels.
Okay.
So that was a pretty broad portfolio,
Yeah.
and I very much enjoyed that work, to be honest.
Okay. And then it all started with an article in the newspaper Handelsblatt talking about some activity. So I think, in my understanding at the beginning, the ministry backed you, but then later things changed.
Yeah, I actually kind of figured that you would ask those kind of questions. And today, actually, I'm more than happy to talk about it, since I believe it is important to, well, in the end, just, openly talk about what really happened. And indeed, it started with an article from Mr. Delhaize of Handelsblatt, and he was suspicious that I had a friend who was running an organization, and that organization received public funding from the Ministry of Transport. So he started to ask questions that were answered by the ministry, and he insisted on asking about my role in those processes, and the ministry kept arguing that I had no formal role in the approval project or in the approval process. Nevertheless, he kind of came out with his own narrative that funding was made available based on friendship. After a while, it became obvious that they had to correct a part of that narrative, and the ministry did a detailed investigation to find out that indeed I did nothing wrong. But then there was like a second phase that came in, since another magazine, Der Spiegel, was asking for other material in the context of hydrogen funding. And based on an email that the first phase of investigations didn't cover, the Spiegel was of the opinion that there was something wrong. And that was the point where the political leadership of the ministry apparently gave in to the pressure of media, and dismissed me and started a second phase of evaluation.
Which was, I understand there was also some external judge involved in this. And what was the result of that second full investigation?
Well, it took the ministry almost the full year of 2024 to evaluate and investigate on all these processes. And in the end, actually, yes, they did task a former judge to assess all that material.
Okay.
And earlier this year, he came out with his final report, which very detailed lays down that all the accusations against me were wrong. In fact, there wasn't even a base for starting those accusations, is his outcome. So obviously, next to the question, what is the role of media in these processes, the other question is, how do political actors handle such a situation?
Okay. Well, I'm sure that wasn't an easy situation. And I mean, as someone who was in the hydrogen, who has been in the hydrogen economy for a while, my observation was that this didn't only have impact on yourself, but on the ministry in general, and that they literally stopped funding for the hydrogen project. Is this correct? And what happened there?
That is correct indeed. Yes, there were obviously personal consequences for me and my family, for that matter. But yes, the consequences for the industry were even more severe, I would argue. You could call it a necessary reaction from the political leaders to say, well, if there's suspicion, we really need to investigate everything in detail. And before we have the results, we will not continue the ongoing business. So they kind of stopped the funding, which led to the fact that some projects were just delayed or didn't even come. All of this in times of difficult budgetary situation within the ministry as a whole. But no, the consequences are actually severe, and we have no time to lose to further develop hydrogen infrastructure, also for transportation, and especially building out a hydrogen station network. So some of those activities were delayed.
Yeah. Well, I mean, fortunately, I understand from the final report that your integrity and reputation has been fully restored by this report now, and it's good that it's out there. Nevertheless, some damage has been done, unfortunately, and for other people that beyond yourself. So, looking at this, what are your personal takeaways from this, and what gave you perseverance to stand through this?
In the end, it needed patience to start with. I was, until the final results came out, never in a situation where I could personally speak about what I think the truth is. Just because if I would have tried, it would have been misinterpreted as justification.
Was it illegal for you to do that? Were you not allowed to do that? Were you not allowed to make public
No, it wasn't illegal, but I just figured that it doesn't make a lot of sense. I was the target of accusations, and without written proof, it's always difficult to say I did nothing wrong. I told that to my friends, I told that to my network, but publicly, I never took that step because I was very sure that it would have been misinterpreted. So it did take that patience. What helped me in that time was, next to the support of my families, obviously the very positive support I experienced from my network. So even the broader network, I had a lot of people writing me short messages saying, well, hey, we know you, and we just still stand by your side. So that, as small as messages can be, psychologically really carries you through such a time.
Oh, yeah. Okay. I must imagine it being incredibly difficult. I'd like to ask, because we're talking about leaders and also future leaders here, always when you are in a position of power, like you were there at that time, there's this risk, that things like this can happen. Someone can feel themselves unjustly treated or something. So what advice would you give to someone, who aspires to be in such a position, or who is in such a position where you have to bring things forward, but you could be faced by an investigation?
Well, I think it's difficult to really give a more specific advice. But as I said, patience is important. Every case is probably somewhat different in one way or the other. So there isn't like a blueprint you could talk about. What helped me a lot was to talk to people,
Yeah.
to have very experienced people, professional people that maybe have been in such a situation or know the political arena well enough to kind of assess my situation. And it was always good to get not only one opinion, but a second one, a third one. And it did happen that I was, writing down things, thinking about could I, somehow argue this more publicly, and then a night later it's like, no, maybe that's not the right
Okay.
way to do it.
Mhm.
So really don't overreact.
Okay.
Try to get as many opinions as possible, and trust advice.
Yeah, trust advice. Okay, stay level-headed. I think, and this is my last point to that. I think, from what I hear from you, it seems to me like you also trusted the process of the investigation. I mean, knowing what your actions were, you then also trusted that if they look, they'll see what your actions were, and you were convinced about, your actions. So you also trusted the process.
Well, as part of the federal administration, you have to trust processes.
Yes.
that's for sure.
Yes.
And there's legal ways how to handle such a situation.
Yeah.
And I was always convicted that I did nothing wrong, and
convinced.
so in a sense, yes,
Yeah.
I actually did trust the process,
Trust
and it was good that in the end, via an external
Yeah.
law expert,
Yeah.
it became very, very obvious that there was no base for any of those accusations.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Well, that's just breaking a leaf for the processes here, and thank goodness that they are still, the way they are. All right. During the intro, you mentioned you're a European at heart, if I interpret it that way. And I think one of our earlier talks, you talked about the European system. We've also looked at some of the geopolitical things. Can you tell me a little bit about that idea? I mean, we've talked about Germany's role and this. What is a European system, and what are you aspiring there?
There are actually quite a few meaningful people that assess that we only will be able to do this on a European scale, ramping up hydrogen for that matter. And it makes a lot of sense because within Europe, we can do both. We have areas where you have wind, sunshine, everything that's required to produce low-cost hydrogen. And we have the large markets, as in Germany, but also the Netherlands and others, that require hydrogen. So through harmonized processes within Germany, harmonized implementation of European directives, other than today national specific solutions, I think we can really kind of form what I would call actually a European hydrogen economic community. And if you look at the beginning of Europe, we started with the coal and steel community. Why did we do that? Because those were the resources and the processes that were needed to kind of build up the countries after World War II, but also to kind of build up a strong economic system as we see today. So I think there is a clear common understanding that hydrogen is needed, and we should, as Europeans, get our act together to make that happen.
Okay, great. One last thing on the international scene. So this probably may be already outdated when this is released, but we see some countries proposing tariffs and, using these kind of tools that create geopolitical shakeups. So what impact do you think this will have on renewables? And I'm also drawing on your experience here over time. You've been in this 30 years, you've been in government, and in as much as tariffs can make toys more expensive at Christmas, what do you see this doing to renewables?
Well, I obviously cannot predict what kind of random or arbitrary actions Mr. Trump will take in the near future. But I think what we see, and that's not only looking at the US, but other regions in the world as well, what we see is kind of like a setup of a new global system. And we will probably see new global trading connections. The IRA in the US was something we've discussed intensively over the last 2 years, and everybody said, well, with that IRA,
That's the Inflation Reduction Act.
the Inflation Reduction Act
Exactly.
in the US to support green hydrogen
Yeah.
and also other renewables. So with that, everybody thought, okay, no, look at that. The US will lead the way forward. Look how fast things can change.
Yeah.
So diversification is, I guess, always a pretty good strategy. And it is now, I guess, the right time to look for other trade routes that we've not used as much as we could or should have in the past. And then obviously you always ask the question of independence, of how reliable is something. So I mentioned Canada, probably a very reliable partner. And
they were at the Hanover Fair also this year, big partner country.
Yeah.
And I just need to say my personal impression was there was, let me say the love was bigger now. What do you see? What opportunities do you see there between Canada and Europe and China, especially as it relates to hydrogen?
You're right. At the Hanover Fair, they were a good partner, and you could feel that it's a political consensus.
Yes.
How to move things forward, and they would jointly need to move things forward. Canada is an energy country, so it is part of the negotiations that the German government is leading with other countries to get hydrogen from. So there's very concrete projects underway. Same is true for Scandinavian countries. The same is true more on an industrial side also for the Middle East. So the Hanover Fair, to me, also showed the technological competencies that we have in Germany. But it also showed, you mentioned China, that they are very eager to look beyond China and see where opportunities are. And then again, we come to the fact or to the point, what can we as German industry, as European industry, provide into the value chain?
Okay. Yeah, speaking of providing into the value chain, I think you are someone of immense experience. And especially after your time in the ministry now, when you look forward, where do you see, what's your personal take on where things are going for yourself also at this time?
Well, I truly believe in system cooperation. So I've mentioned value chain a couple of times. So we need to find a way to get complete value chains financed. What we're observing today is that sometimes you have a B2B discussion between 2 or 3 industry partners, but there's always a missing link. So the missing link needs to be involved as well, from production to distribution all the way to the end user. And we need to find a way to de-risk this complete value chain. So there again is a role for government, and not necessarily in direct funding, but rather in looking at certain guarantees governments could give in order to come to a longer-term investments that is needed. So there is no short-term profit; it has to be longer term. So it's these kind of projects and ideas that are floating around, and I'm discussing with various people how to get involved. And there's, for me, always the question: where can I add value? And in the end, what's the impact of a specific project? We need to get to those projects that really show impact.
So I believe the hydrogen economy needs leaders like you, who stay on, even if they've had the one or the other experience. So that's good. But maybe can you say, why should aspiring leaders join the hydrogen economy and stay?
Easy answer. We need hydrogen. It's a growing market. So we need all the experts from other markets to come in and take that opportunity. It is an opportunity. It's been talked about a lot. I don't like this kind of narrative of hypes going up and down. We've seen over the last decades consistent development of technologies. Look at Toyota. Their press release in February was basically to say, look, we have a fuel cell engine for a car that is as good as an internal combustion engine when it comes to lifetime, when it comes to performance of the technology. So we've seen that consistent development over the last decades, and we now have a clear understanding that we need to decarbonize. We, in the energy field, have to defossilize, and we really need those green molecules, and there's no other way around it. So I guess you just want to get involved. Because it is happening.
Yeah. Great. And what should they bring to the party? What characteristics should they have, these new aspiring people coming?
There needs to be an understanding of the systems approach.
Yeah.
If you look too narrow,
Yeah.
you'll not find the solution.
Okay.
You have to be able to really shape win-win situations. I think that's very important. And consistency, in the end, is one of the main characteristics one would need.
Okay. Well, Klaus, thank you very much. I think that's kind of perfectly, in my mind, summarizes what you have brought to the table as well. Like as in zoom out, look at the bigger picture, look at the bridges, and stay consistent. So thank you very much for coming over, sharing these thoughts. It's been an absolute pleasure. And thank you for also bringing the insights and the knowledge that you have, also with the experience that you had to this. So thank you, Klaus, for coming. Björn and I wish you well for whatever's coming next, the European system, whatever it is. I'm sure it'll be good. And we all need energy, and hydrogen will give us good energy. So that's it. Thank you.
Stephen, thank you very much. It was a pleasure, and thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you, Klaus.